Think your basement renovation project is challenging? Try building an entire underground shelter using nothing but a rusty spade and determination while raiders burn villages 2 valleys over. Medieval folks pulled off engineering feats that would make modern contractors quit on day one. These weren't just holes in the ground either. They were sophisticated survival systems that kept families alive through winters brutal enough to make polar bears reconsider their life choices. When modern archaeologists started digging up medieval sites across Europe, they kept finding something puzzling: rectangular pits everywhere, usually measuring around 2 to 4 meters long and half a meter to a meter deep. At first, experts scratched their heads, wondering what these depressions meant. Garbage dumps? Ancient swimming pools? Turns out, medieval people were way more practical than that. These were Grubenhauses, pit houses, sunken featured buildings that served as homes, workshops, and storage facilities all rolled into one underground package. The genius behind these structures hits you once you understand the conditions medieval families faced daily. We're talking about an era when your house was basically a collection of sticks held together by hope and mud, where winter temps could freeze wine solid in your cup, and where hostile armies might show up unannounced to ruin everyone's Tuesday. Going underground wasn't just clever, it was essential for survival. Here's what makes these dugouts fascinating from a construction standpoint. Medieval builders didn't have engineering degrees or fancy equipment. They had observation skills sharp enough to figure out what modern thermodynamics textbooks now confirm. Dig down just a few feet, and the Earth maintains remarkably stable temperatures year-round, typically hovering around 50 degrees Fahrenheit. While surface dwellers shivered through winters and sweated through summers, underground families enjoyed nature's original climate control system completely free of charge. The first challenge in building any dugout was picking the right spot. Get this wrong and you'd wake up floating on your sleeping mat after the first heavy rain. Medieval builders couldn't just consult geological surveys or soil composition maps. They relied on keen observation and generations of accumulated knowledge passed down through communities. Hillsides were absolute gold for dugout construction. Why? Gravity became your construction partner instead of your enemy. Water naturally flowed down and away from your shelter rather than pooling inside it like an unwanted guest at a party. Plus, digging into a hillside meant you only needed to excavate 3 walls instead of 4. Medieval folks weren't lazy, they were efficient. Every shovel of dirt saved meant more energy for other survival tasks. The soil type determined whether your dugout would last decades or collapse within months. Clay soil held its shape beautifully, but turned into a slippery nightmare when wet. Sandy soil drained well, but crumbled like stale bread under pressure. The sweet spot was finding a mixture that offered both stability and drainage. Builders looked for areas where trees grew tall and grass stayed green year-round, which usually meant water lurked close to the surface. These spots got crossed off the list immediately. Nobody wanted to discover their underground home had become an indoor swimming pool. Smart builders also considered wind patterns during site selection. Positioning dugouts to avoid prevailing winds meant the space stayed warmer and required less fuel for heating. Every piece of firewood saved was one less tree to chop down, one less log to haul back to the settlement. The best locations offered natural wind breaks from terrain features like larger hills or dense tree coverage. Archaeological evidence shows successful dugouts often clustered in specific geographic zones. These weren't random choices. Medieval communities passed down knowledge about which locations worked and which ones failed spectacularly. Some families probably learned the hard way that building near rivers during dry seasons meant surprise flooding come spring. Trial and error taught brutal lessons, but survivors remembered and shared those lessons with their neighbors and children.
The most clever builders even considered future expansion when choosing their sites. They picked spots where additional storage rooms or escape tunnels could be added later without destabilizing the original structure. This forward thinking separated amateur diggers from genuine underground architects who understood their families might need to adapt the space as circumstances changed. Once the perfect location was selected, the real work began. Medieval builders had to work with whatever materials nature left lying around in their particular region. In plains areas, where stone was about as common as a trustworthy tax collector, people got creative with earth, wood, and straw. These weren't luxury materials, but they got the job done when combined with ingenuity and elbow grease. The earthen walls formed the backbone of most dugouts. Workers would excavate the pit first, removing soil in carefully planned stages to prevent cave-ins during construction. The excavated dirt got sorted. Good clay-rich soil was set aside for wall construction, while looser soil could be used for other purposes or simply piled nearby. This wasn't random digging. Medieval builders understood soil composition better than many modern gardeners, recognizing which earth types provided the best structural stability. Creating solid walls from dirt required more than just packing earth against the pit's sides and hoping for the best. Builders mixed different soil types, layering them to create a natural composite that could withstand moisture and pressure. Clay provided binding properties, while sandier soils improved drainage. Sometimes they'd add organic materials, straw, animal hair, even food scraps, mixing everything together to create something stronger than its individual components. Wood provided the structural skeleton that kept everything from collapsing inward. But here's the interesting part. Medieval builders didn't waste precious straight timber on hidden underground spaces. Instead, they salvaged bent branches, fallen logs, and wood scraps that wouldn't work for visible construction projects. That crooked beam that would make a carpenter cringe? Perfect for a dugout framework where appearance didn't matter and structural function was everything. The most common construction method involved sinking two substantial wooden posts into post holes at either end of the pit's long axis. These posts, typically ranging from 15 to 30 centimeters in diameter, formed the primary support structure for the gabled roof that would cover the dugout. Some builders used 4 or even 6 posts, depending on the dugout's size and the specific structural challenges of their site. Archaeological evidence from places like West Stow in England reveals post holes preserved for over 1,000 years, silent testimony to medieval engineering that actually worked. These support posts weren't just stuck in the ground randomly. Builders excavated deeper post holes, sometimes a meter or more, then packed them with stones and compacted earth to prevent the posts from shifting or rotting quickly. The bottom of each post might be charred deliberately, a technique that created a carbon layer protecting the wood from moisture and decay. Smart thinking for an era without pressure-treated lumber or concrete footings. The roof structure posed its own challenges. Builders created simple A-frame designs using timber beams that rested on the main support posts. The roof needed to be steep enough to shed rain and snow, but not so steep that construction became unnecessarily difficult. Most medieval dugout roofs extended nearly to ground level, maximizing usable interior space without requiring the construction of full-height sidewalls capable of supporting heavy loads. Covering the roof required materials that could protect against weather while remaining light enough not to stress the wooden framework. Thatch was the obvious choice across most of Europe. Bundles of straw, reeds, or other dried plant materials were layered thick, sometimes 30 centimeters or more, creating a weatherproof barrier that also provided excellent insulation. The labor involved in cutting enough thatch for a single dugout roof was substantial, often requiring several days of work collecting and preparing materials.
Some regions used turf instead of or in addition to thatch. Layers of sod cut from nearby fields were stacked on the roof like organic shingles. Grass continued growing on these living roofs, creating natural camouflage that made dugouts nearly invisible from a distance.
This had obvious advantages when raiders were scouting the countryside for targets. A well-camouflaged dugout might be passed over entirely, saving the family inside from violence or theft. The walls below the roofline required their own treatment. Some builders left the exposed earthen walls bare, while others reinforced them with wattle and daub. Wattle was a framework woven from thin, flexible branches. Hazel was particularly popular when available, creating a lattice that could be plastered with daub. Daub consisted of clay mixed with fibrous materials like straw, animal dung, or wool, applied wet to both sides of the wattle framework. Once dried, this created surprisingly durable walls that added structural stability and improved insulation. The floor of a medieval dugout sparked debates among builders that continue today among archaeologists. Some dugouts featured suspended wooden floors raised above the actual pit bottom. Wooden planks laid across support beams created a dry living surface, while the space beneath could be used for storage or to control dampness. Archaeological excavations at sites like West Stowe uncovered charred plank remains, suggesting suspended floors were more common than initially believed. Other dugouts had floors that consisted simply of the packed earth at the pit's base. These sunken floor designs meant the pit itself formed the living level. Builders would carefully smooth and compact the earthen floor, sometimes covering it with additional layers of clay to create a harder, more durable surface. In some cases, wooden planks covered only portions of the floor, creating distinct zones within the small space. The entrance design required careful consideration. Most dugouts featured sloped passages leading down from ground level, making it easier to enter and exit while carrying supplies or tools. Some passages included steps carved directly into the earth or constructed from wood or stone. The entrance typically faced south when possible, maximizing natural light and warmth from the sun during winter months. Doors were simple affairs, usually consisting of wooden planks held together with rope or leather straps hung from the entrance frame with leather hinges or wooden pegs. Security wasn't elaborate, but a solid door kept out wind, rain, and small animals. Some families added interior covers made from animal hides or woven textiles for additional draft protection during the coldest weather. Ventilation was crucial, but tricky to manage in underground spaces. Smoke from cooking fires needed to escape without filling the dugout with choking fumes. Most builders positioned hearths near the entrance where rising smoke could flow out more easily. Some dugouts featured small openings or vents near the roof peak, allowing hot air and smoke to escape while minimizing heat loss. These vents might be covered with removable caps during particularly cold or windy conditions. The tools available for all this construction work were laughably simple by modern standards. Medieval folks didn't have power tools, concrete mixers, or even standardized hardware from the local building supply store. They made do with whatever iron implements the village blacksmith could forge and wooden tools they carved themselves. The spade was the workhorse of any dugout project. These weren't ergonomic garden tools with padded handles. Think flat pieces of iron hammered onto wooden shafts that could double as weapons if raiders interrupted your construction project. The iron blade's quality varied wildly depending on your blacksmith's skill level. Some villages had craftsmen who could create tools sharp enough to slice through packed earth like butter. Others had smiths whose work was more along the lines of close enough for medieval standards. Wooden shovels were equally common for moving loose soil. They were lighter on the arms during extended digging sessions, but the wooden blades wore down relatively quickly. Smart builders kept several wooden shovels on hand, knowing they'd need replacements throughout a major excavation project. Some families carved their own replacement blades during winter evenings when outdoor work was impossible, preparing for the next construction season.
Picks provided the muscle for breaking through stubborn clay and rocky soil. These were essentially pointed iron chunks mounted on wooden handles, designed to fracture compacted earth that resisted spades.
Using a pick for hours on end was brutal physical labor. Your back ached, your hands developed calluses on top of calluses, and your reward wasn't a protein shake or gym membership. It was not freezing to death come winter. Motivation came from survival rather than fitness goals. Madex combined the functions of picks and adzes, offering a pointed end for breaking ground and a flat blade for scraping and shaping. These versatile tools were particularly useful for the detailed work of smoothing pit walls or carving steps into entrance passages. Archaeological finds include medieval mattocks that still look functional today, their iron heads preserved by the anaerobic conditions in wet soil. For woodworking tasks, builders relied on axes, saws, and various chisels. Axes handled the heavy work of felling trees and rough shaping of timbers. Saws, when available, allowed more precise cuts, though many medieval saws were less efficient than modern versions. Chisels helped shape joints and create the finer details needed for door frames and support beam connections. The blacksmith wasn't just a village craftsman, he was medieval technical support. When your spade blade broke mid-project, the blacksmith could re-hammer it into working order or forge a replacement. When your pick dulled after days of attacking clay soil, the blacksmith could resharpen it. Tool maintenance was constant, and the relationship between builders and their local smith was crucial to project success. What's remarkable is how effective these simple tools actually were. Their weight and design were perfectly suited for the specific type of work required in dugout construction. An experienced digger with a good spade could remove astonishing amounts of earth in a single day, working from dawn until dusk with short breaks for food and water. Teamwork multiplied efficiency. A group of workers coordinating their efforts could complete a basic dugout in just a few days of intensive labor. Archaeological excavations have uncovered these original tools in surprising condition. Iron implements from 700 years ago that retain their basic shape and could theoretically still function. Meanwhile, modern tools left in a damp garage for 6 months develop rust that makes them useless. The durability of medieval iron tools speaks to both the quality of the smithing and the lower oxygen exposure in the soil where they were buried and forgotten. Once the basic structure was complete, medieval families didn't stop at bare functionality. They transformed their underground spaces into actual homes, adding personal touches that made these dirt shelters less like caves and more like refuges. The decorative impulse was strong even in the harshest conditions. Simple paints made from local clays and minerals created warm tones on earthen walls. Red ochre was particularly popular, its warm color adding psychological comfort during long winter months underground. These natural pigments were mixed with water or animal fat to create primitive paints that could be brushed or smeared onto walls. The resulting colors ranged from deep reds to warm browns and yellows, each reflecting the mineral content of local soils. Carving became the preferred underground art form. Using eating knives, basic chisels, and endless patience, families etched personal symbols, family crests, and religious imagery directly into the walls. These weren't random doodles scratched during moments of boredom. Many carvings served practical purposes. Notches marked storage areas for specific items. Crosses designated prayer corners. Hash marks tracked days, seasons, or cycles of planting and harvest. Some ambitious families created elaborate geometric patterns that would impress modern decorators. These designs often followed mathematical principles the carvers understood intuitively, even if they couldn't articulate them mathematically. Repeating patterns, interlocking shapes, and carefully proportioned compositions showed an aesthetic sense that transcended mere survival. Relief work added three-dimensional interest to flat walls. Builders worked up clay and mud, shaping it into raised designs before it dried. Biblical scenes were common, providing spiritual comfort and serving as visual reminders of faith during difficult times. Saints, angels, and protective symbols covered walls like spiritual insurance policies. When you're living underground during a siege, extra divine protection couldn't hurt.
Personal touches transformed these spaces from generic shelters into family homes with character. Handprints pressed into clay walls, often accompanied by scratched names or dates, marked family milestones. Children's drawings appeared in corners, primitive but charming depictions of animals, people, and the above-ground world they missed during extended underground stays. Some families carved primitive portraits, capturing facial features with surprising detail given their limited tools and artistic training. These decorative efforts served important psychological functions. A bare dirt dugout felt like a prison, a temporary punishment endured until circumstances improved. Add some artwork, and suddenly you had a space worth inhabiting, a place with identity and meaning beyond mere shelter. The decorations sparked conversations when neighbors visited to wait out raids together, creating social bonds that strengthened community resilience. Religious imagery dominated many dugout interiors. Medieval people lived in an intensely religious culture where spiritual protection felt as important as physical shelter. Crosses appeared everywhere, from simple scratched marks to elaborate carved crucifixes. Biblical scenes reminded occupants of divine presence and protection. Protective symbols drawn from folk traditions and regional customs added layers of spiritual security. Some families created primitive murals depicting life above ground. Trees, animals, sunny skies, and pastoral scenes served as medieval mood boosters during particularly grim winters when surface life seemed like a distant memory. These images weren't sophisticated by artistic standards, but their emotional impact was significant. They reminded underground dwellers that the sunny world still existed and would return eventually. Certain dugouts became neighborhood showcases, with families competing to create the most impressive underground decor. Archaeological evidence suggests social status could be displayed even in these humble spaces. More elaborate carvings, finer artwork, and more sophisticated decorative schemes indicated families with more resources, time, or artistic talent. Medieval home improvement wasn't exactly a modern invention, just a medieval adaptation of universal human impulses. But artistic expression was only part of making these spaces functional for daily life. The real challenge came in organizing routines and storing necessities within quarters that made modern studio apartments look spacious by comparison. Living underground meant adapting to spatial constraints that would horrify anyone accustomed to modern housing. Medieval dugouts were basically the original micro-apartments, everything crammed into spaces barely larger than contemporary walk-in closets. Yet families made these tiny quarters work for months or even years at a time. The typical dugout measured roughly 3 to 4 meters long by 2 to 3 meters wide. That's roughly the size of a small bedroom in a modern house. Now imagine fitting your entire family, all your possessions, your food storage, cooking facilities, and living areas into that single room. The design required ruthless efficiency and clever space utilization. Carved benches along the walls served multiple purposes. During the day, they provided seating for meals, work, and socializing. At night, they became beds. These weren't comfortable in any modern sense, just hard surfaces of stone or packed earth, sometimes covered with straw or animal hides for minimal cushioning. But they kept people off the cold ground, and in medieval times, that counted as luxury. Storage became an art form in these constrained spaces. Families carved niches and alcoves directly into the earthen walls, creating natural shelving without using precious timber or floor space. These wall cavities held pottery jars, cooking utensils, tools, preserved foods, and personal belongings. Everything had its designated spot, and family members learned exactly where each item belonged. Archaeological excavations reveal fascinating details about what people kept